Hello there, I'm Brian Taylor. Down the years you may have seen me on the telly or heard me on the wireless, but this is different. This is the Brian Taylor podcast, brought to you by the Herald. Each week we'll be examining the very latest in Scottish politics with the people who make and break the news. We'll hear expert analysis from the Herald's unrivalled political team, and I'll discuss the issues that matter to you with a veritable plethora of guests from all shades of opinion. Coming up, does she have a mandate to not next year?
She doesn't have a mandate. She must be incredibly disappointed.
I think the only way to really break the logjam is actually to have the referendum, and then one way or another, that is it. And then politics can focus.
That is it. If the SNP lose, that's it.
We were also told that in 2014, though, Kevin.
Hold on.
So I actually think we need to take this moment to look at how we do things. And if anything positive has come out of this pandemic, it's that we can be innovative when we have to be.
Well, then, a very warm welcome to the latest edition of the Brian Taylor podcast with the Herald, Scottish Parliament getting back into action, MSPs gathering for swearing in and taking the oath and all that sort of thing. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome a new member of the Scottish Parliament. That's Pam Duncan-Glancey, the Labour MSP for Glasgow. Delighted to welcome Rachael Hamilton, a returning Conservative MSP. Welcome to you too. And delighted to welcome to Kevin Pringle of Charlotte Street Partners, but formerly a senior advisor to the SNP Scottish Government. But first and foremost, I'm delighted to welcome my colleague from the Herald, Alistair Grant. Alistair, bring us up to speed with where we are on the return of Parliament, taking the oath, getting going, getting started. Where are we on that one?
Yes, we've obviously, just to recap, we've had the election. Obviously, SNP came tantalisingly close to majority, but just fell one seat short with 64 seats. Conservatives remained, the biggest party in opposition, 31 seats. Labour on 22 seats. The Greens on 8, which is a record for them, and the Lib Dems on 4 seats. So at the moment, over the last couple of days, we've had MSPs registering, just kind of getting to know the Parliament, getting to know where their office is, where the cafeteria is, getting to know if the coffee's any good, all that kind of thing. And then Thursday and Friday, we'll have the kind of crucial election of the presiding officer of the Scottish Parliament and the deputy presiding officers on Friday. And then next week, we can expect Nicola Sturgeon to be kind of formally signed in as First Minister and to unveil her cabinet. We're probably expecting a bit of a reshuffle there.
Well, there was about a third of the cabinet vanished, so that's likely. Any tips for presiding officer? I mean, presumably the SNP wouldn't be very keen to give one of their number up, given that they don't have a majority.
Yeah, it's a difficult one. Just speaking to kind of different people in the parties today, and it seems to be a little bit of a deadlock at the moment, because I think a lot of people are unwilling to give that kind of seat away. I think the name that's coming up most often is Alison Johnson in the Greens. Speaking to a kind of source in the Green Party today, and they were sort of saying that she hasn't ruled herself out, but she's also got reservations, and she's obviously probably one of the more experienced MSPs in the Green group. So I think losing her would be a bit of a blow to them in some ways, and she might feel herself that she's got
well-liked though and collegiate, maybe the sort of individual that would fit the bill.
Yeah, definitely. And I think other names that were coming up were Liz Smith and the Tories. I think she actually has ruled herself out now.
Okay.
So I think Alison Johnson is definitely the one to watch, but yeah, it seems to be a bit of an impasse.
The all reward inspection from my experience. Bringing Pam Duncan-Glancey. Pam, first of all, congratulations upon your election. You must be delighted. The key question that Alistair raised there, what is the coffee like around the Holyrood campus?
Well, thank you, first of all, and thank you for inviting me to join you all today. The coffee's not bad, actually. I've only had 2. When I arrived yesterday morning, we were taken into a member space for the start of our induction, and we got a coffee, and I kid you not, I had 1 sip and then it started and I had to leave it. So I was like, right, I'm going to need to get faster with my coffee. But today I'm pleased to report I've managed 2, so we're all good.
You've got yourself an office and you're ready for the swearing in ceremony and all that sort of thing, ready to go?
Absolutely, very much so, yes. Looking forward to it. The office, we've got a temporary, we've all been allocated temporary offices just now. I quite like the one I'm in, so maybe it will be permanent. And then, yes, the swearing in ceremony, looking forward to that. Trying to think about something that I can do that's symbolic, because I think I said previously that I can't raise my hand with my palm facing out the way, just because of my joints. So I'm thinking of what else to do. So I might have a wee surprise up my sleeve for that.
Oh my goodness! Well. I hope it goes well for you. It's always a thought, these sort of things. Rachael Hamilton, delighted to welcome you, and many congratulations to you on being re-elected. I mean, I've been covering politics forever, but I suppose you count as one of the experienced team, given that you're not a newbie like some of the others.
Yeah, I think it's great, and thank you for the well wishes, Brian. I think it's great to see new people on the block. It's going to shake things up a little bit in the Parliament. Okay. And welcome to Pam. And I've got 10 new colleagues as well, of course, and I'm really looking forward to working with them. I mean, we've just been working together over Zoom and doing lots of calls together in that way. So it's been quite a strange and restrictive way to get to know our colleagues. But I suppose, I'm really looking forward to tomorrow. And I've been looking for something to wear. And obviously, it's quite difficult because the shops have only just opened. But I'm going to have to drag something out of the wardrobe, Brian. But my mother-in-law's very kindly given me a beautiful ancient Hamilton tartan sash for me to wear. So I'll be proudly wearing that tomorrow. And I'm hoping to do take my oath in Welsh, because I'm actually Welsh. And I hear that a lot of people are planning to do quite different things this time.
Very good. Kevin Pringle, of course, you and I will face this problem, being the fashion icons that we both are. But perhaps the Parliament is now getting back to business. So with all of you now, Alistair as well, let's get down to business. And right away, there's the hideous business of this hideous plague beginning to relent. But Kevin, the Scottish Government are warning: don't take it for granted. Don't just let the liberalisation of lockdown rip.
I think that's right. There's obviously great. I think we're just so much looking forward to just the sort of prospects of being able to do things, to be able to rediscover some of our freedoms again. But I think very much tempered with that concern, particularly about new strains. And I think it's been said so many times that nobody's safe until we're all safe, and that looking at it really on a global basis. But it simply is true, because of course, if there are strains that develop to which we don't have immunity, to which our vaccines are less effective, then obviously that can set back so much of the progress that we've made. So yeah, we're looking for. I think we're all feeling, much more optimistic, much more upbeat about things. I think it's even very interesting, actually, just listening to Pam and to Rachael, and congratulations to you both, just about you taking up your seats in Parliament. I got a kind of a sense almost of the excitement that you'll remember, Brian, surrounded the Parliament when it was first up and running in 1999, and that first session in the opening days of that. But possibly because there are so many new MSPs, there's been such a high turnover of MSPs with so many standing down, that there's a real sense of a kind of a new Parliament in all senses. So there is that optimism, but I think we're all very concerned that we don't rush it. We don't do too much too soon, and that we're not caught with obviously worst case scenarios such as strains that come in to the country that could set back our progress. Let's
talk politics around it as well. Rachael and Pam, first, the Prime Minister's announced that there'll be an examination, a review, an inquiry into basically the handling by his government in the spring. The First Minister in Scotland has already signalled she's willing to have contributions to that, but also a distinctive Scottish inquiry as well. Rachael Hamilton, do you think there are questions to be asked and questions to be answered, more importantly, both north and south of the border, regarding the handling of the coronavirus pandemic?
Yes, I mean, there were concerns, weren't there, on either side regarding the availability of PPE, the kind of discharge of elderly people into care home settings. Here in Scotland, that was an issue as well, and I had a lot of work to do around that. I think the Prime Minister has said that he will welcome an inquiry next spring, and I think that's important also, because we don't want to put pressure on the people who we are still relying on effectively, particularly doctors and nursing staff. And so I think it is important to look back on this. I don't think we've reflected enough in the past, to be quite honest, when we've had issues not as serious as this, of course, and to see what we could have done better and perhaps learn the lessons so that we can take forward some of those lessons in the future if, God forbid, this ever happens again.
At one point, Labour was agitating for the inquiry to be getting underway almost immediately. Have you sort of, perhaps as a collective party, gained a bit of patience? Do you accept that maybe tackle the virus first and then hold the inquiry along the maybe roughly the timetable the PM is suggesting?
I think getting something done about it quickly was always the case, because there were so many deaths, there were so many people who were let down, the inequalities across the country, and who was dying and who was most impacted on, particularly people in precarious work or people who are living in poverty, disabled people with learning disabilities. The reality is we had to get things right in terms of making sure that we did everything in our NHS, we did everything across the board to control the virus as best we can. And I think the inquiry itself is going to be really welcome. What I think is incredibly important, though, is that the person who chairs that and who leads that inquiry has the trust and faith and support of cross-party for a start, but also of the public, because that's going to be incredibly important. I also think it's important that the inquiry looks beyond how we handled the immediate sort of virus transmission or viral transmission, but actually what was the state of play before this? So when the NHS, when we came into the pandemic, what had we done to prepare for something like this? What was the readiness of our NHS and health and social care service?
Yeah, okay. Kevin, the First Minister has already expressed her deep sorrow about the issue of the transfer into care homes. Jean Freeman indeed talked of it being the former Health Secretary talked of it being a mistake. Actually, she's still Health Secretary, isn't she? And until a new one is appointed. Where do you think that sits in this the review of decisions taken in Scotland, Kevin Pringle?
I think it's really at the heart of the whole thing. Pam talked about the spread of the virus. Obviously, it happened to such an extent within our care sector. So it's going to be really one of the most important aspects of the inquiry into this. And of course, that's also feeding into the business of this Parliament that's just going to get down to its business in the next few days, in the sense that one of the big policy issues that we're going to be looking at is the establishment of a national care service. And there's going to be a huge debate about that. But that, not entirely, because certainly I think Labour have been campaigning on this issue for about a decade, I think. But it was one of these issues that, in light of the circumstances of the pandemic, it became not just an other policy debate. It really, quite rightly, completely understandably, rose to the top of the political agenda. And there, I suspect
people going into a care home expecting care,
so
treatment and attention.
So I think it's really, really important for the inquiry, really important for the wider policy debate. I think maybe another point on the inquiry as well. There's obviously, it's important when it begins, but it's also important when it ends. It needs to take as long as necessary to do its business, but clearly there'd be some concern.
Would you expect a separate Scottish inquiry or an inquiry in Scotland feeding into the UK inquiry? What would you expect?
I think there would be, so many of the aspects of dealing with the pandemic were devolved, and that was clear when,
And the First Minister has said, regardless of what happens at a UK level, there will be Scottish investigation.
And I think that's necessary, because clearly, as well as the issues to do with the care sector, there are issues to do with, for example, education.
I'm going to talk about
clearly the health aspect. So I think so many of the aspects of it were devolved. That that would be.
I want to bring that in right away with Alistair Grant. Alistair, we've had in the last few days talking about stress among pupils in the education sector. We've got one health board at NHS and Fries and Galloway. I'm sure the others are saying the same, talking about pressure with a backlog of cases because of the focus upon COVID. Talk about these things, education and health service, being areas and sports and the arts, all of these things, areas that are affected and afflicted by coronavirus.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think these are going to be some of the most defining issues in the first months and years of this new Scottish Parliament. There's just so many different aspects to the impact of the pandemic, and the impact on education, children, the impact on the health service. I think there's things the government's going to have to focus on. I think they're very aware of that themselves. There were problems existing, or perceived problems, of how the government was handling education and health before the pandemic. So coronavirus has kind of exacerbated certain issues. And I think the cultural sector will be an extremely important area as well. I mean, there's been a lot of, understandable happiness about the changes on the May 17th coming up, about being able to have a drink indoors in a pub or a restaurant, or hugging your family and friends for the first time in months. But At the same time,
As you're saying, it's not serious to open with that degree of social distancing.
Exactly, yeah. And we still don't have a date for nightclubs, for example, for big venues to bring back.
Are you a regular visitor to nightclubs, Alistair? I wouldn't have seen you as one of that scene, you know. And me, I'm never out of them, but you know.
Sometimes, but probably whenever.
Oh dear. Right, to get serious again for a moment, Rachael Hamilton, your party has been very concerned about the NHS, but also particularly concerned about the problems that you see arising in the education sector.
Yes, I mean, I think Alistair's absolutely right. I think, you know, there were issues prior to the pandemic with regards to our concern around the number of teachers, the pupil to teacher ratio, the fact that 1 in 4 kids live in poverty, and that now we're seeing an exacerbation of that because, of course, kids are now in the position where they've lost a lot of face-to-face learning. And we need to resource that to get them back into that catch-up situation. We're very keen on a national tutoring programme, as you know, and we're also keen to restore those teacher numbers. And I know that obviously there was an attempt to do that by the SNP during the COVID pandemic, but we're still around about 1,700 teachers behind.
Critics of your party might say that, you know, if you're talking about relative poverty, that isn't exactly helped by a decade and more of austerity from the UK government and constraints upon welfare benefits.
Well, I mean, when you talk about welfare benefits, Rishi Sunak, increased the universal credit to £20 per week and extended that for another 6 months, which was an important intervention. And I think now we're seeing around about 500,000 people on universal credit in Scotland. I think the important thing here is to ensure that we have some sort of strategy with regards to what we're talking about as an enterprise bill. We want to protect jobs and we want to create jobs. We want to skill people up. We want to retrain, to rebuild. And I think that's important, is to address very urgently, actually, you know, the situation that we might find ourselves with sort of furlough being taken away and the jobs market being affected in terms of employment in Scotland. There's very important things there, but you're right to sort of bring up the fact that I think cross-party we need to go into this next Parliament absolutely putting children first in terms of their prioritising of that catch-up.
Let's bring in Pam Duncan-Glancey. Pam, on these maybe on these, come to the economy in a minute, but these issues of education and the NHS, Labour really has pursued these rather vigorously.
So I think everybody's aware of the shambles really that happened with the education system last year, and so many children and young people were seriously let down, particularly in terms of being graded on the basis of their postcode rather than their ability. And so that's something that we cannot allow to happen again. And I sincerely hope that the government this time round and cross-party actually agreement would be helpful.
Didn't Minister say that they learned for that and there'll be no use of that approach in future?
Yeah, they did, but then what they've proposed looks like exams in any other name, basically. So
you have to assess pupils in some way. You can't just say you're an A, you're a B, you're an A, you're an A, you're a B. You've got to assess them in some way. Teachers have got to base that assessment upon something, don't they?
Of course they do, but they certainly can't be basing that assessment on postcodes. And I think they have to base it on the advice that teachers have given and that parents have given. On the NHS, I think it's incredibly important for us to think about how we're going to support the workforce, because as we get our screening services, our cancer services, our elective surgery and all of that back on track, the same people who have just got us through probably the most difficult year the NHS has faced in its history are now going to have to also help us through still that, because we're still in the pandemic, it's still there, coronavirus is still infecting people and people are still dying, but we're going to have to rely on the same people to get us through the next part. So we need to make sure that our NHS workers and our care workers are paid properly, that they get breaks, that we support them and give them the resilience that they need and support that they need to be able to take us through the next stage of this.
Kevin, do you think that the Scottish ministers are going to face particularly tough questions really on the NHS? Tough questions generally, for goodness sake, it's a really difficult period, but tough questions on the NHS, perhaps particularly tough questions on the issue of pupils being stressed out and anxious and worried about their future in education?
I think inevitably, we saw this a year ago. I found it quite interesting in that clearly education's devolved, if you like, the 4 constituent parts of the UK, but notwithstanding that devolution of decision making, it seemed that the same decisions were taken in all 4 jurisdictions in terms of, the algorithmic approach and, the concerns that Pam's raised about how that worked out. And then, of course, one by one, kind of domino effect, each government in each part of the UK abandoned that, quite rightly, abandoned that in favour of teacher assessment. And it's the debate which you've referred to, Brian, about, yes, we're going with teacher assessment, but how do teachers arrive at an assessment? I think certainly there is an opportunity to learn from this, not just for the immediate period of the crisis, but for the longer term, about where exams loom or should loom in that overall assessment of student performance, in the sense that a teacher can set an exam. The same exam can be set for pupils in different schools in different places, but equally teachers can look at the results, clearly factor the results in, but also consider the situation that for very many young people, they're coming from family situations, home situations, just the kind of quality of the home that they may live in, which are dramatically different for people from more affluent backgrounds, maybe just literally nowhere to study.
So I mean, the Scottish Government has made progress on that, but they concede that progress has been really slow by comparison.
I think that's right, but the point is, Brian, rather than just having a kind of a totally kind of assessment exam results basis for determining grades, then with teacher assessment, you can actually take into account the fact that people are coming from much more disadvantaged backgrounds than others, and factor that in to the awarding of grades in a sense that would equalise the situation for young people, regardless of their domestic situation, the wealth of the family that they come from. So I think we could do that, but that wouldn't just be something to think about for now. That would be something to think about, on a much longer term.
Brian, I think that's an important point, because actually we've all felt slightly uncomfortable, I would say, with that sort of Scottish index of multiple deprivation, where the teachers had no choice at the time. Of course they didn't, and they did the best that they possibly could when they abandoned the algorithms associated with exam assessments. And I think the fact that kids from poorer areas ended up being marked, I suppose, more steeply than those from wealthier backgrounds kind of really highlighted that perhaps there is an issue there, and that this sort of SIMD doesn't really work. Do you think,
Rachael, and then Pam, perhaps, there's been some suggestion from some quarters that we should abandon external exams altogether? They put too much stress and strain upon pupils. And the alternative argument is, but they're needed by universities, they're needed by employers. What do you make of? Do we need to return to the highers, basically, Rachael, when it's possible? And then Pam. Rachael first.
Well, I think that obviously the university situation, where today we're hearing that possibly universities are going to increase the requirements for grades and hires for entry into the university because of the situation that has occurred. So therefore we're then squeezing young people out from going into that education setting. So yes. I don't think we're getting this right, to be quite honest. And I think, yes, the pandemic has played part in this, but we still are in a situation where we're not getting kids from poorer backgrounds into universities as much as we'd like to. There's still that inequality.
Thanks for that, Pam. What do you make of that?
And there is a huge inequality, but part of that is not all down to the education system. Of course, it is part, that is part, and the way that kids are examined and the way that they're tested is crucial to that. But we also have to look at the poverty-related attainment gap as well, and actually that's something that I think we really do need to turn our attentions to as well. So we need to look at how we're going to test pupils in the future, and I don't think the answer to exams is but unis require them, because then surely we work with unis to see what else they might require. Exams have kind of locked people out of accessing university or college in the past for various reasons. So I actually think we need to take this moment to look at how we do things. And if anything positive has come out of this pandemic, it's that we can be innovative when we have to be, and that it's given us pause for thought where we've had to do this differently.
But the universities are, they're passing people with degrees in subjects like law, and engineering and medicine. And if you're going to be hiring people to be doctors, lawyers, and engineers, you need to know that they are qualified as doctors, lawyers, and engineers. And don't you need to know the same when they are entering those courses? You need to know whether they can actually perform to a certain acceptable level of skill, not just that they're, that they've attained some advantage in other ways. You need to test those skills, don't you?
Absolutely. And that's something that we need to work together with pupils, with families, with teachers, and with universities and colleges to get that right. The point I'm making is that it doesn't have to be the way it is currently or the way it was before COVID. We can take this opportunity to say, right, how can we actually do this differently? And yes, I get there has to be benchmarking, of course there does, but there are different ways to do this. We should take the moment and not miss it to change that.
There are examples, Brian,
please, Kevin,
university application where young people get to university with lower grades because of because of the disadvantaged background, and the evidence is that they do just as well.
Right there.
So the issue here is, exams are really the kind of, it's the piece of paper, it's the access to be able to go in the first place. If people can go, then the evidence is that they do very, very well. Okay. Based upon upon these examples of people getting to university with lower grades because of the disadvantage of.
And let's not forget that university isn't everything. We know that apprenticeship work, and it's an important route to get into the job market. And the Scottish Conservatives want to see a demand-led apprenticeship, and they also want to see an education guarantee to the age of 18, whatever it might be.
Let's talk about the job market. Let's talk about the economy. Alistair, we've got some figures out saying UK economy shrank by 1.5% in the first 3 months of 2021, but there's some optimism as well, isn't there? For the medium to longer term.
Yeah, well, I think the economy is just, we've talked about education and health. The economy is the next big issue, I suppose. We've had the pandemic, the impact that's had. We had the furlough scheme, which will be coming to an end later this year. So I think dealing with these things is going to be the other major thing the government's going to have to deal with. And I think
the economy and its related aspect of public spending as well.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we've had obviously the furlough scheme kind of ties in with issues around. I mean, the other big issue that I suppose we've not talked about yet, I don't know if we're going to come on to it, is the kind of constitutional debate.
We'll do that in a minute, yes.
And how these things kind of tie in together.
Let's bring in Kevin Pringle. Kevin, each of the parties promising in various ways to freeze income tax. Each of the parties promising increased expenditure, particularly on the health service and education. Does that add up?
Well, we will see. I mean, all the politicians through the campaign all insisted that it all did add up, and all based upon the resources that will be available. I suppose the big question, which there was reference to in the Queen's speech yesterday, was the commitment to restoring the public finances to a sustainable basis. These were the words. We don't know precisely what that means. Obviously, concerns that, or at least questions as to whether that means if you like, a return to the austerity that characterised the period after the financial crash. In which case, obviously, all bets are off for the amount of money that would be available. So it's uncertain in that sense. It is all available and affordable as we speak, but things could change pretty quickly, pretty dramatically, if the decision taken at Westminster was to obviously want to get to that sustainable position in a way that I think most people in Scotland would strongly oppose by returning to austerity. And that
Rachael, are we talking about a return to UK austerity in your view? And would that have a backwash in Scotland if we did?
Well, austerity can be viewed in many ways, and one of the ways I would see it that it wasn't good for the economy is that it puts pressure on public services in terms of health and well-being. And I think we know that the UK government have given unprecedented support to the Scottish government with furlough and VAT cuts and income support to self-employed, business-backed loans, equating to around about 23 billion. We also know that the Scottish economy isn't going to recover until back to pre-pandemic levels until around 2024. Mm-hmm. So there's going to have to be a concerted effort here in terms of ensuring that we protect jobs, but as well as creating jobs. And I think that's going to be a very difficult ask right now, particularly in the climate. But as we see retail shops and other businesses start up again,
yeah.
I think there is an opportunity there that we need to look at to ensure that we actually, turbocharge our growth and get back to where we'd like to be, because obviously there is pressure on public services right now, and we can't have good public services unless we have a good economy.
Let's bring in Pam.
Yeah, I find it. I'm not sure that listeners will be entirely convinced that we're in safe hands when it comes to that. And I get that the furlough scheme ploughed a lot of money, but it had to do that. And I think you said earlier on, Rachel, that furlough could be taken away. I mean, these are things that are political choices, and it's incredibly important that we learn from the experiences of the past. Austerity did not work. It didn't work for public services, as been said, and it didn't work for individuals. But also we need to think about the people who were working in precarious work before the pandemic, the people that worked in precarious work during it, and that unless we take action on 0 hours contracts, on paying the living wage, using every single lever we have, such as business support funds being tied to good employment practices and better pay. Unless we do all of that, then we're not going to really be putting money in people's pockets. And the other thing we would really need to recognise today as well, that as we speak, I think approximately 479 people in Glasgow are about to lose their jobs in the McVitie's factory. Yeah. Now that is an example of the sort of decisions that are, if they are taken, are going to leave hundreds of people without work, without funding, without support. And where are the jobs going to be? Because I'm not sure where. I'm not sure I've heard of any manufacturing jobs being recreated in that particular area anytime soon.
Forgive me, do you accept, Pam, Rachael Hamilton's point that if you are to build public spending and public services over a period, you have to have growth in the wider economy? You have to have the creation of growth in the wider economy to sustain that.
Well, of course there does need to be, but you also need to have the political will to spend the fund, to spend the money that you take through tax, and also to make sure that you get the money from tax that you should be getting. So, for example, like online giants such as Amazon. So it's, yes, there needs to be growth, of course there does, but it's also about using that growth for public good, and that's where we need to be putting pressure on this time, I think, in Parliament, to make sure that if there is growth in this period, that it gets reinvested right back into our public services, so that we have the sort of Scotland that we all know we want, and the sort of Scotland where everyone can flourish.
Kevin, what do you make of that?
Yeah, I think that's right. It's really a question of the period over which public finances are restored to, quotes, sustainability. Because the issue after the financial crash was that was done, or attempted to be done, far too quickly. And as Pam said, it actually was counterproductive, because it just made the economy weaker, which made revenue weaker as well, which meant that the deficits carried on for longer. So I think learning the lesson of that would be to seek to do that over a longer period of time rather than a shorter period of time, which I think is more sustainable from a public finance perspective, but more importantly is better for individuals, better for public services. But that's the debate, and there's different views there, but ultimately that sort of decision is taken at Westminster, and people in Scotland can have a view on that, but we can't obviously control that for as long as that sort of decision is taken by forgive me, Rachael Hamilton, do you accept that lessons need to be learned from what is being suggested there, a mistaken approach by George Osborne and others after the banking crash of 2008?
Well, I think that the Conservative government is a Conservative government, unlike any other previous Conservative government. So, I mean, we obviously took over from a Labour government, and I think at the time the Conservatives had a kind of a set programme in terms of the economy, but now I think we can see a change in the UK government. We can see the change in their approach, in the way that there has been a sort of I suppose, an intervention from the government. We tended to have the value of being a small government, but now we're sort of more of a large government because of the interventions that have been made. So
but Rachel, there can't be anything. There can't be criticism leveled
it shouldn't
have taken a pandemic. It shouldn't have taken a pandemic to support. It shouldn't have taken a pandemic to provide the support for public services, the support for wages, the support for for the NHS. It shouldn't have taken a pandemic to get all of that in place. And I know I get that, and it's quite important for people to say, oh, but it's a different type of Conservative government. The people who, for example, missed out on the self-employed support grants, the people who did not get the £20 uplift in legacy benefits from the UK government, those people think it's the same old Tories. And actually what we need to be doing is looking at where we've made the mistakes in the past and do this differently.
Rachel.
Well, I think perhaps I mean, I don't want to go too hard on Pam here. She's brand new, but she seems very competent. So well done, Pam. But but I mean, this is the problem with Labour, and this is why Labour have gone down in the terms of their vote share and the number of seats, because you've got to recognise that, you know, before the pandemic there was an increase in the Scotland's budget of 1.5 billion, and it's about actually putting the criticism at the door of the SNP government, who choose and can choose the policies. And have got the ability with the devolved competency to fund councils fairly, for example. You know, why is Labour criticising a Conservative government when the SNP have policy choices that they can make? And I think that the issue lies at their door.
We will also hold them to account too, Rachel. Local government budget can't continue.
Bring in Kevin Pringle. It's all your party's fault.
Well, that goes with being in government, and of course we're in this pretty extraordinary position where the SNP government has been in office for 14 years. Usually, in most democracies, by this time, then the government
get sick of them by that time. Yeah.
So, but I think I think that it's part and parcel of being in government. It's part and parcel of accountability. It just so happens that we've got this very elongated period, which no sign of ending yet, that party is going to be the SNP for the foreseeable future. But certainly scrutiny, certainly accountability, absolutely important. And I do think, going back to what I said at the beginning, the fact you've got this big infusion of brand new MSPs, I think it'll add an awful lot of energy actually to that crucial aspect of democracy.
Talking about energy, talking about the future. Alistair Grant, does the foreseeable future include IndyRef too?
I don't know. I don't know who's hard to answer that question. I mean, certainly Nicola Sturgeon has said that she wants to hold it in the first half of this parliamentary term, which will take us up to the end of 2023. I mean, I personally think it seems unlikely that we'd have one in that timescale. There's so much kind of debate to happen before then. There's, if Boris Johnson says no to IndyRef 2, which it seems likely he will, we could be heading for a constitutional clash in the courts. So it's hard to tell where this is going to go.
Let's go to Rachael Hamilton. Rachael Hamilton does the First Minister who will be returned to office next week, Nicola Sturgeon. Does she have a mandate to go ahead with a referendum on independence?
Well, I mean, we've got to look at the makeup of the constituency seats, and more unionist voters, a larger proportion of unionist voters voted for those, Labour seats, Liberal Democrats and Conservative seats. And I think on
the list, it's the other way around, and the constituents are only like that because the Greens didn't stand in very many seats.
Yes, but it's important to recognise that, Nicola Sturgeon did say that she wasn't going to call a second independence referendum, but then before the votes were even counted, she got to the podium and stated, that was her intention. So I think that a lot of people who actually voted for the SNP will be wondering what they actually had voted for. I think the other...
They scarcely disguise their support for independence and for achieving that via referendum. She didn't exactly hide that during the campaign.
Well, we've got to also look at some of the polls that were out. There was an opinion poll that showed only a third of voters think that leaving the UK is an urgent priority. And of the last 10 opinion polls, the yes group was only ahead in one of them. So that's important to recognise.
Forgive me, does she have a mandate or not? Does she have a mandate to not next year?
She doesn't have a mandate. She must be incredibly disappointed. She's hardly made any headway. She has a net gain of 1. And that must be a huge disappointment to her as the leader of the SNP. And she's got to rely on the Greens again. And that's going to make her minority government in quite a difficult position, I would say, because possibly moving into difficult territory with the perhaps some of the negotiations that she might have to do with Patrick Harvey and Lorna Slater. Perhaps there will be policy proposals that might not sit comfortably with their own voters, with the SNP voters.
Thanks for that. Pam Duncan-Glancey, is there a mandate in this current Parliament of the current session of the Scottish Parliament for a referendum on independence, for India Ref 2?
I think what there is clearly a mandate for is a focus on getting our NHS back on track, protecting jobs, ensuring people have more money in their pocket, and trying to make massive dents in reducing child poverty.
Yeah, we hear all of that. Is there a mandate for a referendum on independence?
Labour won't tell you.
Let's find out. Pam, is there a mandate for a referendum on independence?
I think I've said this before, Brian, and I'll say it again. I got into politics because I want to do things to improve our NHS. I want to improve social care. I want to make sure people have more money in their pockets.
I'm not hearing an answer. Is there a mandate for a referendum on independence?
We didn't. We had an election. We didn't have a referendum, we didn't ask that on the ballot paper. A referendum was not on the ballot paper. What was on the ballot paper were jobs, the NHS, education, and getting all of those things back on track.
Come on, party names and individuals are on the ballot paper, not those. Why won't you say whether there's a mandate for a referendum? Not now, not next year, maybe not even the year after. Down the line, is there a mandate for this referendum to be held again?
There wasn't a majority for that, but at this moment in time, I honestly think we need to be focusing on getting ourselves through the pandemic and focusing on the recovery.
Kevin Pringle.
Well, that's right. I think everybody agrees with that. But as to whether there's a mandate, well, the answer is yes. I like to say yes, but clearly it is yes. I also think we make a mistake if we compare or if we interpret Holyrood election results according to Westminster criteria. The whole point of the electoral system that we've got in the Scottish Parliament is we want to have a non-majoritarian culture. So therefore, the electoral system threw up a government elected very clearly. It won 85% of the constituency seats in the Scottish Parliament, but across the two parties that had a referendum in their manifestos, the SNP and the Greens, then...
But on both, Kevin, on both the constituency and the list votes, Scotland is 50-50 in supporting parties of the Union and parties of independence. How is that a firm silver golden mandate for going ahead with a referendum? When your party said it would be once in a generation?
Yeah, but election results are determined by candidates elected. That's how you measure what's happened in an election. Votes cast directly are how you measure the results of referendums. So if we want to put that issue to the test, the 50-50 issue, then that's done through a referendum. So even just drawing attention to that fact would actually point to the logic of settling this through a referendum. But certainly in terms of the election...
I can't see you, but I can hear heads shaking. Pam Duncan-Glancey and then Rachael Hamilton.
I was just going to say, Brian, I think you make a really good point there, because it actually shows that the country is actually divided on that issue, which makes it very, very difficult. And we cannot focus in that division if we are to focus on the recovery. And that's why I think we need to do that first.
Rachael Hamilton.
Well, I mean, I'm going to say, aren't I, that the democratic will of the people was demonstrated in 2014, and that opinion hasn't really moved since 2014. And I mean, I've got to agree, if we're being sensible about this, that voters have said that time and time again in the last sort of 6 months that we need to ensure that we protect jobs and livelihoods, and that we get things up and running in terms of cancer screening and, you know, cancelled operations and all the other things. And, you know, it's all very well saying, you know, to Pam, yes, this isn't an answer, but actually it is an answer, because it is absolutely what we need to be focusing on. Because that's what the public expect. Can you imagine if we went into this ridiculous constitutional crisis yet again, pitting each other against one another and becoming a divided country again? And I think this is a time that we could actually come together and work together, because, to be honest, when we are distracted with this obsession that the SNP have about separating the country, when I don't agree with Kevin Pringle. They don't have a mandate. They might be the largest party. They are a minority party propped up by the Greens.
Kevin, we're out of time, folks. Kevin, a very brief final word from you.
I think the only way really to resolve this, there's going to be the argument in election after election after election. And in actual fact, you know, the SNP is doing very well in election after election after election. I think the only way to really break the logjam is actually to have the referendum. And then one way or another, that is it. And then politics can focus
that is it. If the SNP lose, that's it.
All the things that we all want to.
If the SNP lose, that's it. You'd give up the aim of independence.
I believe that to be the case, which is why I think
we're also told that in 2014, though, Kevin.
Hold on, Kevin, go on.
I believe that. That's my personal belief. You can look at international examples in Quebec where that's been the case. So if people believe, and they're absolutely genuine, I'm sure, in the belief that the case for the union would prevail, and I think the way to, as I say, to sort of break the logjam here would be, therefore, to have the referendum. Both sides would go into it very confident. I would be very confident that yes would win. But if there's an objection to this always being there, well, it's always there because people are always voting for the party that advocates it in terms of being the main party in Scotland, then I think the way to consensually, democratically, at least resolve the issue would be to put it to the people in a referendum during the term of the Scottish Parliament.
A huge thank you from me to all who have participated, to Rachael Hamilton, to Kevin Pringle, to Pam Duncan-Glancey, to Alistair Grant. Huge thanks to everyone who's listening to this podcast on whatever means you can choose. It's been great. To the MSPs, have a wonderful Parliament ahead. And to all of you from me, Brian Taylor, toodaloo the new.
This podcast was brought to you by the Herald. We're giving you the chance to get exclusive access to even more insight, analysis and opinion with a Herald subscription. Take 20% off an annual rate with the code HERALDNEW2021. This offer is for new subscribers only and is only available with the promotional code. Subscriptions will renew at the standard rate unless cancelled. And sign up to our free evening politics newsletter Unspun to get snap analysis from some of our top contributors every day. Head to heraldscotland.com for the details.